Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One-to-One. An estimated 1 in 8 American women will develop invasive breast cancer at some point in their lives. And in the not-too-distant past, a diagnosis of breast cancer meant being exposed to the most aggressive and debilitating treatments, surgery, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy, that were life-sapping and could lead to a host of other medical ailments. Even now, these remain the primary tools in medicine's arsenal for dealing with the disease. Are promising new therapies emerging? Could immunotherapy one day replace the more debilitating treatments? And can women reduce their chances of developing breast cancer and improve their odds of fighting it by changing the way they eat, sleep, and exercise? Dr. Christine Horner, plastic surgeon, breast cancer prevention expert, and author of Waking the Warrior Goddess, will address some of these questions. Welcome.
Thank you.
As I said, you're a plastic surgeon by training. How did you get into writing books and giving talks about how to prevent breast cancer?
As a plastic surgeon, I was doing a lot of breast reconstructive surgery. And my patients were getting younger and younger and younger until finally I was doing women in their 20s. And then my own mom got breast cancer, and she died about within 9 months. Now, I was working as a spokesperson for the American Cancer Society at that time on breast cancer issues. And I was taught to say, we don't know what causes breast cancer, we have no new cure, and the best thing that women can do are breast exams and mammograms in the hopes of catching it early. Well, that's what my mom did, and it didn't work for her. And of course, then I'm looking at what happens with my patients who are in their 20s. And, you know, no matter what stage you catch it in, it's an incredibly emotional and debilitating journey that someone has to go through. And so I thought, you know, there's got to be something that women can do to help to lower their risk. Mm-hmm. So I started going through the medical research, and this is 20 years ago, actually, and you know, before we really knew much, at least in the media. And so as I was going through the medical research, I actually found thousands of studies that show exactly why we have a breast cancer epidemic, everything we're doing to contribute to it, and the things that we traditionally don't do in this culture that are highly protective, and they were all natural. Mm-hmm. So food, supplements, herbs, lifestyle. I was actually taught none of this in my medical training, you know, and didn't even have a course in nutrition. But as it turns out, what the research is showing is that about 95% of the cases of breast cancer could be prevented by knowing exactly what you need to avoid and what you need to favor regarding your diet and lifestyle.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that the incidence of breast cancer has actually declined significantly since the year 2000.
2003, there was a 7% drop, and that had to do with the awareness that hormone replacement therapy in the Women's Health Initiative study showed that hormone replacement therapy definitely increased the risk of breast cancer, as well as gallbladder disease and heart attacks and all sorts of things. So the prescribing practices for hormone replacement therapy changed overnight.
And that helped reduce the incidence?
7% lower, and the next year there was another 7% drop. Yeah, now it stayed stable.
Nonetheless, about 231,000 women will be diagnosed with invasive breast cancer this year, and 40,000 will die. But they use the term invasive breast cancer. What does that mean as opposed to anything else?
So there's a couple of different distinctions, and one that's getting a lot of controversy right now, like on the cover of Time magazine was like, what if we just wait, and see what happens? So there's invasive breast cancer means that it's truly a breast cancer. And it's distinguished from what we call ductal carcinoma in situ, or DCIS, which is something that's only found by mammography. And it's the earliest, they say it's the earliest stages of cancer. It's not cancer. It is a tumor marker, and it will say, okay, you have a slight increased risk of developing invasive cancer at some point in the future. But now what the studies are showing is that there's absolutely no difference whether you have DCIS or not, and what the statistics are as far as your breast cancer mortality is concerned. It's only 3% regardless of whether you have that or not. So now it's like, well, you know what? We don't need to treat this. It can be a watch and wait. And I say, well, instead of watching and waiting, there's actually active things that you can do, that can be protective.
But not necessarily surgery or chemo.
No, all the natural stuff.
Okay,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. A lot of progress has actually been made in treating breast cancer. I mean, you used to have the radical mastectomies,
Right.
which have, and a lot of those have been replaced by lumpectomies.
Correct.
And I gather reconstruction surgery is pretty routine.
Yes.
In fact, you were instrumental in helping to pass the federal law which requires insurance companies to cover breast reconstructive surgery, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So in 1993, which was only 2 years after I started my practice, I got a letter from an insurance company saying we're not going to pay for breast reconstruction on your patient because it's not medically necessary. And I thought, this must be some sort of mistake because they'd never done that before. But in fact, that was what their ruling was, and I had to do all sorts of appeals. And then I got another letter from the insurance company on my 32-year-old patient saying we're not going to pay for breast reconstruction because it's on an organ with no function. I said, oops, you just said that to the wrong person. So I organized a national campaign to pass legislation to make it mandatory that insurance companies pay for breast reconstruction following mastectomy. I met with President Clinton numerous times, as well as, First Lady Hillary, and had Ted Kennedy sponsor the bill. And so we actually successfully got it through Congress, and it was tacked on the budget bill in the 11th hour. And now it is a federal law that all insurance companies must pay for breast reconstruction following mastectomy. And during that campaign is when my own mom got breast cancer and died from it. And I thought, you know what? I mean, we definitely need to correct this atrocity to make sure that women have this surgery to reconstruct them available. But really, the main problem we have is this breast cancer epidemic.
Right.
And so that's been my whole focus and passion now. Yeah.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk recently about using immunotherapy to treat cancer and breast cancer. Has it been used to successfully to treat breast cancer that you know of?
Yes. So the immune system is composed of cells and some chemicals in there, but they're all designed, these cells go out and they look for what we call foreign invaders in the body. So they kind of memorize like every single structure in the body that's normal. And when they recognize something that is foreign, so that could be bacteria, it could be virus, or it could be a cancer cell, because we form cancer cells all the time. It's a part of our normal physiology. If our immune system is healthy, it will recognize those cancer cells and get rid of them. If something happens to our immune system to debilitate it, so unbelievable amounts of stress, we know that, for sure. Staying up too late at night, eating junk foods, sugar is something that completely knocks the immune system out for like 5 hours afterwards by 90%. So then the immune system cells don't recognize it, and those cells can start to grow out of control. Now, they are using certain therapies which take advantage of this thing about with your immune system where it can recognize the cancer cells and get rid of them. And there's a number of different ways that they work with it. But in relationship to breast cancer, there is a particular gene called the Neu gene. And people who are Neu positive, we call it, they have more aggressive cancers. Usually it's younger women that have that, but there's a particular drug that was designed called Herceptin, which is prescribed for patients that are Neu positive, and it works through the immune system. So it's a little complicated, but it does work through the immune system.
But the idea is ramping up the immune system so that it can fight cancers more effectively?
And that you can train your cells actually to fight it more effectively. You can make it so they can actually recognize the cancer cells, because sometimes the cells are so similar to our own they can't recognize it, so it helps it to recognize. And then there's also different mechanisms where our immune system, like if it's really ramped up, it can attack your own tissues, and that's what happens in autoimmune diseases.
Right.
So there's kind of checkpoints, they call it, where it doesn't ramp it up too much, but you can eliminate some of those or change them using some of these drugs, which is actually how Herceptin works.
And are these drugs that ramp up the immune system, are they less debilitating than what we normally know of as chemotherapy?
Generally. Now, they do have some side effects with them, but they generally are, which is one of the big advantages of them. They're not as toxic as normal chemotherapy drugs. Yes.
We talked about mammograms, and there's been some talk that we do too many of them, and so we set off false alarms. My doctor, I remember, once told me that there are more effective ways of detecting breast cancer. I think she mentioned ultrasound, MRIs, but the insurance companies don't want to pay for them routinely, and so women instead go and have to get their breasts put in a vise and squashed.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
But your focus is primarily, as you said, on preventing breast cancer in the first place.
Correct.
And you talk about waking the warrior goddess, which I gather means harnessing the power of nature and natural medicines to avoid getting cancer. You talk about food being medicine. Now, we all know, we've been told 1,000 times we're supposed to eat vegetables, especially colorful vegetables, green vegetables, red vegetables, yellow vegetables, and whole grains. But you say organic is important, and what vegetables do you recommend most highly? Why is organic important?
Well, organic is important because when we do conventional growing, we use herbicides, pesticides, growth factors, all of these things that are known to potentially increase the risk of cancers. So if you eat organic, you really minimize the herbicides and pesticides and so forth. Now, as far as the types of vegetables you can consume, each one of them has their own pharmacy, but there's certain ones that have some standout when it comes to cancer fighting, and that is a family of vegetables called the cruciferous vegetables. Traditionally, we think of broccoli, with that, but I brought with me here some kale. So we've heard a lot about how nutritious kale is, and it's very true, but the cruciferous family has about 17 different members in it. Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, bok choy. Some of them don't look related, but if you cut across the stem, there's a cross on it, which is why they're called cruciferous. And they all have different chemicals.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they're you didn't know that, right? So they all share certain chemicals that have been really researched, and they've been found to be very protective against cancer. So that's something that they have in common. So eating a cruciferous vegetable, so one of the families of that, every day would be ideal because the protective effects are so great.
You talk about eating good fats, avoiding bad fats. We've heard about some of the bad fats, trans fats. What are the other bad fats?
Well, saturated animal fats, right, and the trans fats, which the U.S. government has now banned because they're so bad, for us.
Can't use them in anything?
No, even the smallest amount of it is considered unhealthy. They found that it has a huge inflammatory effect in the body and drastically increases the risk of cardiovascular disease as well as certain cancers. You
also say just avoid red meat. Period. Now, what would Dr. Atkins say about that?
Well, I guess we would have a contention with each other. Yeah, so what the research shows is that women who consume the most red meat, they have a 400% increased risk of breast cancer. And if you do grilled or well done, there's new carcinogens that form that are very carcinogenic to the entire digestive tract and drastically increase your risk. So yeah, it's a good thing to avoid.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with more with Dr. Christine Horner after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Dr. Christine Horner, plastic surgeon and expert on breast cancer prevention. So you brought some cancer-fighting foods and substances. Why don't you tell us about them?
Sure. So, we were kind of talking about the immune system as basically one of the common denominators, and keeping your immune system strong is one of the targets as far as some natural approaches. Now, regarding foods that can help to keep your immune system strong, the one that targets it the most actually is medicinal mushrooms. So medicinal mushrooms have been found to support all the different cell types very specifically in the immune system. And I always say, are you going to eat therapeutic doses of medicinal mushrooms every day? Probably not. So that's when a supplement can come into play. And this particular one is one of my all-time favorites, which is out of Japan, and it's called AHCC, which stands for Active Hexose Correlated Compound, which is why we call it AHCC. But they've done hundreds of studies on it and shows that it supports every single cell type in the immune system, and does it so well that it actually lowers the risk of many different kinds of cancers, from breast cancer, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, even melanoma. And they actually prescribe AHCC in the hospitals in Japan because the survival statistics are so much better, for the cancer patients. So that's one simple thing to do. Then there's fermented foods that we use that are kind of like probiotics, because what we've discovered is that the type of bacteria that we have in our colon actually governs a lot of our health. And our immune system, one of the primary sites where it's manufactured, is in our colon. So the type of bacteria that you consume is extraordinarily important so that you have the healthy ones that are best at supporting the immune system. So some of the things that you can do, this is kefir, which is kind of like a yogurt, drink that's got the bacteria in it. Kombucha is another one that's out of Japan, and it actually uses a mushroom as a base, but fermented with the probiotics, or you can actually take a probiotic as well. Next is the spice turmeric. Now, turmeric is really interesting because there's been more research on this plant than any other plant. So there's over 8,000 studies in the medical research, and many studies that have been done here in the United States. MD Anderson is actually doing a lot of research on it, and has been found to inhibit 17 different kinds of cancers. There's over 150 different ways that it works, and there's 30 different mechanisms that are specific against cancers. So it's kind of one of those spices where you absolutely want to take advantage of the medicine that it has every single day. And again, are you going to cook with it every day? If you live in India, you may, because that's the basis for the curries. But that's one that I recommend taking a supplement with too, because you want to get that therapeutic dose in every day.
Now, it's a spice as opposed to a vitamin.
Correct.
And there's been controvery about vitamin. I have to say that I have gone off vitamins. I have decided that they are huge. It's a huge scam. And that, periodically you will hear reports, certainly on the news, that the recommendation is that it's a waste of time to take vitamin supplements. That you should get, you should be able to get. It's better to get the vitamins you need by eating the food.
That's correct.
For instance, if you want omega-3, you eat a piece of salmon once a week. That should do it. And vitamins are expensive, and some of them are not absorbed too well into the body. But you are a vitamin fan.
Well, it depends, and I agree with you. Like if you're eating an organic vegetarian diet and probably juicing and doing that kind of stuff, which not very many people do, then yes, you get your adequate nutrients in every day. However, the vast majority of Americans do not do that, and if you eat conventionally grown foods in particular, our soil is now very nutrient depleted. So our vegetables and fruits do not have the same kind of vitamin content that they used to have. Now, when you take a vitamin supplement, and as you said, it's like a lot of times they're not even absorbed, and that's absolutely true. So you have to make sure that you take a vitamin supplement that is food-based. So those you will absorb. And if you get really technical with certain people, we can kind of look at, a lot of times we'll look at a person's genes and see what their genetic profile is, because some people actually need some additional amount of vitamins because they don't metabolize them like they should, and you wouldn't know unless you got that, checked. And vitamin D in particular is one that is highly, highly recommended for most people because it acts more like a hormone. It activates hundreds of different genes, and in most chronic disease states, including cancers as well as multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and so forth, they find that vitamin D levels are almost universally low in people. So that's one that's got great anti-cancer effects, and they've done a number of studies where they give prospectively, they give people vitamin D supplementation, follow them into the future, so that's when we get our very best information, and the studies show that it cuts breast, prostate, and colon cancer in half.
So the vitamin D3, the bottle of vitamin D3 that's in my cabinet that I've stopped taking, I should start taking it
I think you should.
What's the big deal with soy? You go into a health food restaurant, and everything is made with tofu that's made up to look like something else.
Right.
So tofu, the food that can masquerade as many other foods.
Yes.
What's the big deal with soy?
Sure. So a lot of controversy came with soy back in 1996 when there was a study out of San Francisco where they said Soy, they thought, was something that was very protective. So they said, okay, in our reductionistic view of science here in the United States, they said, we're going to find the active ingredient in soy, which they chose genistein, which is something that they call a phytoestrogen or a plant estrogen because it will hook onto the estrogen receptor. They gave this supplement to women in a form and a dose they would never get in nature. And after a year, they thought, oh, it's going to show this huge protective effect, when in fact what it did show was that it looked like it was stimulating the breast, and that there was more cell division and so forth.
You don't want that, right?
And so they're like, oh my God, soy causes breast cancer. But what the studies show is that people who consume whole soy foods, so not supplements, but whole soy foods, so we're talking tempeh, miso soup, tofu, gotta be organic. So that's another huge thing. Here in the United States, most of the crops are not organic. They're genetically modified and sprayed like crazy with herbicides and pesticides. You do not want that. But organic whole soy foods. And they find that there's almost a linear relationship between how much soy a woman consumes and how much lower her risk of breast cancer is. And the age group that's the most therapeutic for it is actually prepubescent and early teen years. So in this country, we have this situation where the age of puberty is getting younger and younger, and now the average age is about 10, whereas around the world it's 16 to 17. If a girl starts her period at age 10 versus 16, her risk of breast cancer is 50% higher for the rest of her life. So if a girl consumes tofu, and this is the specific studies that were done on it, organic, of course, prepubescent, it will actually delay the onset of puberty. Once a girl goes through puberty, her breast tissue is immature and more sensitive to environmental toxins, bad foods, and even electrical issues, EMFs, and so forth. So part of the problem with us finding breast cancer in women in their 20s, it means it started in the teen years,
yeah.
And part of the issue is that early puberty.
Right.
So tofu and soy products, whole soy foods, will mature the breast cells and make them more resistant to environmental toxins. And in fact, what they found is that if girls eat tofu on a regular basis when they're prepubescent, early teens, they have a 50% lower incidence of breast cancer for the rest of their life.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. You don't have good things to say about birth control pills or hormone replacement therapy. In both cases, we're talking about a lot of estrogen.
Correct.
So why?
Well, both of those have been shown to increase the risk of breast cancer. So hormone replacement therapy, we know for sure. We've done the long-term studies on it and shown absolutely there's an increased risk. So breast cancer is hormonally driven. And what that means is a hormone causes it to grow. That hormone is estrogen. So in general, the more estrogen you're exposed to over your lifetime, the higher your risk of breast cancer is. If a girl starts her periods early, she's getting all these additional periods that
right.
a normal woman would. And during that, having
more
a period,
cell division.
Right. Exactly. There's a surge of the estrogen that occurs.
So do you recommend against the use of birth control pills in favor of other types of birth control in general?
Ideally. Now, the thing that's difficult with the studies is that they keep changing the birth control pills. So you have to actually follow people out for 20 years before you can get accurate statistics on cancer. And so the statistics that we have out that say, okay, if you take it more than 7 years, if you have a first-degree relative that had breast cancer, these are things that really increase your risk. But we're doing a delayed, statistics. So it may be they're getting safer and having, less of a bad influence,
right.
With it over time.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember how excited I was. I was still a columnist, and they announced, I guess at the time it was called Seasonal. And it was it's a birth control pill that you take, and you have only 4 periods a year
right.
instead of
right.
every month. And I guess that's sort of good because you have less cell division, certainly, and the convenience, I would think. I don't know if you have any thoughts
right.
about that.
Yeah, so here's, so I'm also trained in the traditional system of medicine, Ayurveda, which Deepak Chopra, talks about. And so the fundamental principles of it are that there's certain rules we need to follow as human beings that brings us into imbalance, and then that causes our inner healing intelligence to be very smart. Whenever you start disrupting the way that we were designed to be, there's bad problems that can occur. So for instance, when you do not have periods like that, it can demineralize the bones, and there's numerous side effects that are associated with that. So You want to, work with the natural processes of the body. So I just think that that's a completely bad idea, to do that. Yeah.
We have, I learned that from your book that garlic can do more than just stave off vampires, but you'll have to read the book to find out about that. And green tea should be your drink of choice.
Yes.
But we have about a minute left.
Sure.
If you could summarize in that time the most important steps that women can take to avoid getting breast cancer, what would they be?
So first of all, your diet, and stick with plants, organically grown plants as much as you can. We didn't talk about sleeping, but by going to bed by 10 o'clock and getting up by 6 o'clock, those are the optimal hours for sleep, and it all has to do with hormonal balances. Crucially important. Stress, major contributor to breast cancer, and so doing effective stress reducing techniques every day like meditation, Tai Chi, or even deep breathing are things that can profoundly kind of train your nervous system to not respond quite as much. And the most important thing, more important than anything else, than genetics, than diet, is feeling loved and supported. So as human beings, we're wired to feel love. And if you have toxic relationships in your life, they're actually the most damaging stress to the human body. So making sure you just surround yourself with people that are loving and supportive. And I say you got 7 billion choices now. So choose wisely.
Okay. And your book offers us a 30-point plan on how to significantly reduce your chances of getting cancer. And so in order to find what that plan is, I'll have to get your book.
That's right.
So I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank Dr. Christine Horner for joining me today. Her book, Awaking the Warrior Goddess, which proposes natural ways to prevent and fight breast cancer, is in its 3rd edition. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.